Expansion of democracy. In this module, you will learn about the expansion of democracy through the world in the 20th century. Most of the countries in the modern world have established a democratic form of government. However, this evolution of democracy has not been an easy one. The history of democracy is a history of struggles to establish and, more importantly, to retain democracy. Democracy in the modern world can be dated back to the Glorious Revolution in Britain in 1688. This process was carried forward by the French Revolution of 1789, which heralded the ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity. The American Declaration of Independence of 1776 also laid the foundation of democracy in the new nation-state of America. Though these three events established the edifice of democracy in the modern world, there is a dichotomy in the practice of democracy. Struggles for democracy in the 19th century mainly dealt with the demands for universal adult franchise, which was denied to a major bulk of the population. Through most of the 19th century, the right to vote in most countries was restricted to propertied men. Women, blacks, and the non-propertied section of the society were denied this right. These groups had to wage long periods of struggle to secure suffrage rights. The process of decolonization in the post-Second World War era gave a boost to democratic expansion. Several countries gained independence with the aspiration of establishing a democratic system in their new nation. However, this transition to democracy has not been smooth in a majority of these countries, with governments oscillating between civilian and military ones. The events in post-independence Ghana and Pakistan bear evidence to this trend. Revival of democracy in Latin America and the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991 further accelerated the spread of democracy. The end of Soviet control over communist East Europe countries and the emergence of new republics resulted in many of these countries opting for democratic system of governments. Thus, we can see that since the dawn of 20th century, democracy had brought many new countries within its fold. Countries like India, Brazil, Ecuador, Sweden, and Finland became democracies in the middle of the century. There are several countries like Ecuador, Brazil, and Egypt that adopted democracy initially, but owing to several factors, failed to sustain it and diverted to authoritarian systems. Since 1974, the world has witnessed a third wave of democracy, dramatically increasing the number of democracies in the world. Till 2005, there were about 140 democratic countries in the world. Certain features can be discerned about the nature of the spread of democracy. Firstly, the spread of democracy has not been even. Democratic expansion was mainly confined to Europe and North America through most of the 20th century. Secondly, democracy has not become a universal phenomenon with many countries, like China, Pakistan, Myanmar, still being undemocratic. And lastly, many countries of Africa are still in a state of transition to democracy, being embroiled in numerous civil conflicts. Let's recall what we have learned. The history of democracy in the modern world is a history of people's struggles to establish and sustain democracy. The Glorious Revolution of 1688, the French Revolution of 1789, and the American Declaration of Independence of 1776 laid the foundations of democracy in the modern world. However, there is a dichotomy between the ideals and practice of democracy, with suffrage rights being restricted to propertied men. The process of decolonization brought several new nations of Asia and Africa within the fold of democracy. However, many of these countries found it difficult to sustain democracy, and their governments alternated between civilian and military regimes. The disintegration of Soviet Union in 1991 created a number of new republics, most of which adopted democracy. An analysis of the expansion of democracy reveals certain features of this trend. The democratic expansion has not been even. Despite the popularity of democracy as a form of government, it has still not become universal. Many of the post-colonial African countries are in a process of transition to democracy.